proposed the rebasing of the GDP and CPI, marking a pivotal step towards enhancing the accuracy and relevance of the economic indicators. Specifically, the NBS proposed changing the real gross domestic product base year from 2010 to 2019, while also expanding the scope of the GDP calculation to include the digital economy, pension fund administrators, the National Health Insurance Scheme, the Nigerian Social Insurance Trust Fund, modular refineries, domestic households as employers of labor, and illegal and hidden activities. So to help us understand this better, I'm being joined by Dr. Ayo Anthony, who is the head price statistics at the National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you so much, Dr. Anthony, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Basil Abia, who is co-founder Veriv Africa. Thank you so much, Basil, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let me start with Dr. Anthony. Of course, this actually falls within your purview. What is your idea as regards the rebasing of the GDP and the CPI?
Okay, thank you. CPI is Consumer Price Index, which measures changes in prices of goods and services consumed by households. It is from this indicator we get what we call inflation rate. Now, when we talk of rebasing of CPI, CPI is a relative index. Relative in the sense that you are comparing prices in the current period to a given period. That given period is what we call the price reference period or the base year. Now, over time, the base year needs to be updated, that means brought closer to the current period. The process of bringing the base year closer to current period is called rebasing. Also, CPI is a fixed basket index, meaning that the item in the basket is assumed to be fixed for a given period of time. Now, over time, the item in the basket become obsolete because consumption pattern determine what is in the basket. And you know consumption pattern changes with time due to change in income, change in taste, and other factors. So rebasing also involves updating the basket, which we call CPI basket, so that new items that households are consuming will be included in the CPI basket. So in the nutshell, CPI rebate is all about adjusting the price reference period and the weight reference period to reflect current consumption pattern and current price change in an economy. That is CPI rebasing.
Okay.
GDP rebasing is just similar to CPI rebasing. It's all about bringing on board new economic activities, production and consumption that were excluded in the preceding base year, bringing them on board in the capturing and computation of the output level and their growth. That's what we call GDP rebasing. GDP is not a relative index that you are comparing current output to a base output. No, the base period is just the period you are commencing activity, output activity from. Presently in Nigeria, our base year for GDP is 2019. That means economic activity from 2019 will be brought on board into the output level computation for the nation. Before this period, our base year was 2010, and the result was launched in 2014. So meaning that some economic activity that have been excluded in the current GDP rebasing will now be included in the GDP computation. That is what we call GDP rebasing. It's all about bringing new economic activities into the basket of output that determines the economic growth of an economy.
All right. All right, that's noted. So Basil, based on the summation given by Dr. Anthony, how do you also see it as it reflects, of course, through GDP, CPI, and the state of the economy? And this is why I'm asking this. Rebasing relies on accurate data from a base year and comprehensive data, and that is what actually helps in coming up with an accurate information about the state of the economy. So how do you see it? Do you think it could be accurate enough?
No, I don't think it will be accurate enough, and my reasons are very simple. First, the price reference period will not capture the core shock areas of the last 4 years. Ideally, while it is right to always rebase the CPI methodology as well as the GDP calculation methodology every 5 years, because you want to get realities, the current realities of the macroeconomy, you should ideally look for the base year that is more stable. Now, with a base year of 2024, there's a potential of skewing the eventual inflationary trends because you're not capturing the core shock years of 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2020 as well. Let's not forget that in that particular space of 5 years, that bandwidth of 5 years, we've had shocks from the cash crunch. We've had shocks from subsidy removal, cost-reflective tariffs, distortions caused by severe exchange rate deterioration, valuation of naira tanking. And we can add more and more to that mix. So if you're losing out of that mix, as a researcher, whenever you're carrying out your time series analysis, you're not capturing the actual macro realities of that particular core period because you're starting from a very peak year. Now, secondly, the other issue with this, and I'll be honest, is that when the methodology starts diluting the actual rate for consumption and expenditure, you're not going to get the accurate reality of price pressures or price changes. What do I mean by this? Currently, according to the NBS Living Standard Survey, food expenditure for Nigerians is at least 59%. Aggregate food consumption expenditure for average households in Nigeria is 59%. I know that in Sokoto, the numbers were around 91 or 92%, for instance. But on average in the country, when you have food consumption at 59%, it's risky when you start to say you're going to try and tweak the weighting and reduce it. Now, currently, not based off the current the CPI rebasing methodology that was already announced in the workshops and the sensitization events with in concordance with the NESG, but just the immediate past CPI methodology, the weighting is put at 51%. That's the weighting of the food sub index. And I remember vividly when the financial derivatives company in 2022, led by Bismarck Rewani, he decided to reconstruct that particular weight class for a recalculation of Nigeria's inflation. And yes, what he found out, he used the then Living Standard Survey of 2019, the data, and readjusted his food weight or the food sub index weight to 55.5%. Do you know eventually what he got for inflation at that period? His inflation rate was, or the FDC's inflation rate due to the reconstruction of the weighting class, was 45.56%.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the NBS were reporting inflation at 17.17%. Now, here's what I did over the weekend. I decided to use that FDC reconstructed weight class. And I found that based off of that, inflation in Nigeria should be at 85.86%, using that reconstructed weight of the food sub index at 55%. Let's not forget, he also adjusted for other sub indexes. Now, with the new CPI methodology, while they're introducing at least 3 more indexes, which I welcome, it is very important because you are capturing every single or minuscule and large components of consumption.
Okay.
What I don't welcome is the dilution of the food weight, especially when we know that Nigerians are spending more of their expenses and of their earnings on food. So why are you reducing or diluting that particular rate? Those are my core concerns. The price reference periods being used, I think should be picked from a stable year rather than a peak shock year. Because what happens is that that because that is the ground zero. It's the month-on-month inflation right after that process would potentially skew the inflationary trends to be lower. And then my second concern, of course, is the mere fact that we're going to have issues with, we're going to have general issues in terms of distortions in the readings of inflation.
All right, Basil, let me quickly bring Dr. Anthony into this. So, Dr. Anthony, of course, you did listen to Basil talking about the probable dilution of the parameters in this proposal to rebase the economy. What are your suggestions or your opinion? What's your opinion around this? And can probably the use of digitalization of data collection remove doubts around accuracy and reliability of economic indicators in this matter?
Now, thank you, moderator. Let me respond to what your guest is saying there so that Nigerians will not be misinformed. NBS does not allocate weights. No, that is ignorance. A survey was conducted called Nigerian Living Standards Survey of 2023, which is also known as Household Budget Survey. That survey plus another survey conducted in 2024 give us a new expenditure of household. I don't know where he got his figure from, but I'm giving you as the authentic authority of data in Nigeria. A Living Standard Survey of 2023 and Survey of Fair After in 2024. The result gave us a new weight. NBS does not reduce or increase weight. That is erroneous. The data, the survey gives the result. So please let it be known by Nigerian and other stakeholders. NBS does not reduce food. NBS does not reduce weight of other varieties of items. It's the survey that gave that result. And we should know that consumption pattern is not static, it's dynamic. The proportion of income I spend on food in 1999 should not be the same thing now. There are other important items in my scale of preference that are also competing with food. Health is there. Education is there. It's not only food that is highly inelastic in Nigeria today. Education is also inelastic in demand. But energy is also inelastic in demand. So we should be polite and before we come out and give a figure. So NBS does not allocate weights. It is the survey result.
Okay, so with the process,
I want you to understand.
That's noted.
The weight of food in 2009 was 51.8, but now is 40.1. That does not mean expenditures of people in Nigeria on food have reduced. It is relativity, proportional. Absolutely, the expenditure of food has increased, but compared to the total income, other things are competing with food, as I've told you. So that is number one. Number two, I want to ask your guest, has he studied the CPI manual? Before you come and talk about CPI, go and study the manual. IMF and World Bank ILO manual on CPI computation. Chapter 9, section 9.27, please go and study it so that you can talk authoritatively on the decision on price reference period. That is what I will say.
All right, so
if you go to that
Dr. Anthony.
Chapter 9, section 9.27 is clearly written there, the determinant of price reference period, not just subjective hypothetical statements.
All right, Dr. Anthony, thank you very much for that response. Now, Basil, let me quickly come to you. Yeah, I understand. Basil, let me quickly come to you. Let's give it a bit of foundation. In 2014, Nigeria rebased its GDP for the first time, according to reports updating the base year from 1990 to 2010. Now, this exercise revealed that Nigeria's economy was much larger than previously thought, growing by 89% based on findings. So does it mean that that information as at that time is not accurate, depicting the true nature of the Nigerian economy, and that actually fuels your fear as regards what the eventual outcome might be if there's another rebasing now?
I don't have fears about rebasing. My context, and I think this is the core of my argument. The core of my argument is what are the underlying fundamentals to the methodology that is going to be deployed. for the CPI rebasing. Like I've always said, the GDP rebasing is important. You have to be able to recurrently carry that exercise out. It is very statistically important. It's also very important to the economy as well. The last rebasing actually carried out a true reflection of the size of the economy. That's for GDP. And I'm very sure that that's going to happen again once the GDP rebasing occurs. I do have fears that I'm not sure we're going to have the size of GDP that most Nigerians would want in that sense, because the value of the naira has deteriorated over time due to the devaluation. We know that the naira has been devalued by at least 40% in the last 18 months due to the exchange rate unification that was carried out. So while the GDP will be slightly larger than currently is, as well, the IMF already put the number hovering around $200 billion US. I think that with the GDP rebasing, we'll probably have a slight bump. It won't be a significant bump like that of the 2014 exercise, where we had a 80+% increase in GDP size. And the core fundamental behind that is the naira with which we're computing our GDP would significantly reduce in value when you convert, of course, to the USD. So I don't have any concerns with the GDP rebasing exercise. My concern will always be with the CPI methodology being deployed. The weight reference period, the price reference period, and like Doctor said, he was asking whether I'd read the CPI manual. Of course, I've read the CPI manual. Of course, I've participated in a number of the workshops. Of course, I've read the slides. Let's not forget last year during their sensitization workshop, the price and weight reference periods that they picked is significantly different from the price and weight reference period that they're currently using. They did not communicate why that changed. It was 2021, that 2022, sorry, that they used for price reference. Why did it suddenly change in January in their new sensitization workshops with the NESG? Why did it change to 2024? There has to be reasons behind that. There has to be logical reasons behind that. I understand that the Living Standard Survey is the fulcrum for the core fulcrum for the weighting. No doubt about that. But again, just like Bismarck Rwani and many other independent researchers have tried for, you have to be able to juxtapose those weighting based on consumption patterns. And as at the time, I'm using the example from 2022, as at that time, the consumption patterns were significantly different from what NBS was reporting. And that's why when they did their own reconstruction, the numbers were significantly higher. So this is it. Doctors shouldn't see this as us coming against the NBS. No. We love our country. We love all of our institutions. We want our institutions to be better. The reason for NBS reporting the CPI and the inflation is to be able to give policymakers, investors, and researchers a near accurate view of price pressures and price changes over time, especially when you juxtapose that to a base period. And what we are saying here is that the weighting for food is distorted because that's not reflecting on what the numbers are telling us.
So Basil, let's
for the creation of alternative propositions of numbers. And when you have that situation where people are no longer relying on the NBS for their inflation calculation, they are now relying on companies like FDC.
So I guess that's where, yes, Basil, I guess that's where the challenge is. Having the kind of data that speaks to policies that will better the lives of people. And if the data rather is not accurate, then policies could be skewed. So I understand that part. So let's quickly take on Dr. Anthony before we do a wrap on this. Another side of this conversation, according to the NBS, has to do with illegal and hidden activities like courtesanship, or should I just say sex trade, and drugs peddling, which will now be included in the calculation of the country's GDP. Now, I'd like to ask why this is, because a few people, or some people rather, say that it is not permissible within an economic framework. Dr. Anthony.
Okay, thank you. Before I answer your question, let me respond to one of the issues raised by Mr. Bashir quickly. I will still advise him to go back and study the manual very well. I'm quoting again chapter 9, section 9.27. The manual says the price reference period should precede a year to the point of releasing of the data. He even mentioned December. Go and read it very December. If you are launching in January, your price reference period should terminate in December of the preceding year. I'm quoting the manual. Then why do we change from 2022 to 2024? Now, if you go to the manual very well, the price reference period can be a year after your weight reference period or a year before. I'm the authority, I'm talking now. Now, a year before was 2022. That was our proposal, and that's why we call stakeholders, including IMF, World Bank. You know, after the stakeholders essential workshop, our attention was drawn to something. After the survey of 2023, we observed we have over 200 new varieties of items. New, because consumption pattern shows that were not in our existing basket. And any item that is new, you must have their prices at the base year. And in CPI rebasing, you avoid estimation as much as possible, actual price.
Okay.
So we observe that if we want to use 2022 as the base year, we'll be estimating the prices of over 200 items, which is not good for the system.
Okay, so Dr. Anthony, I'd like you to quickly reflect on the question I asked so that Nigerians are also clear on that.
The question you asked me now. NBS is not bringing illegal activity into GDP computation. Now, according to the system of national accounts, it's permitted if you have the data and your system allows that. Yes, it's written there. Now, in my discipline, that's what I call positive economic reasoning and normative economic reasoning. Based on positive economic reasoning, it is what is. And what is in the manual is positive economic reasoning. It is there. But if you look at normative, value judgment, what ought to be? Based on what ought to be and value judgment, people will say we're encouraging illegal activity in the output computation of Nigeria. Based on that, NBS is not trying to bring it in. We don't have the data on prostitution. How do we get data on prostitution? It is what we have accurate data on, we bring on board. So presently, we do have data on prostitution. The only data we have that is administrative is data on drug, which we get from NDLEA.
Okay.
But all this activity, hidden activity, no, it's just a proposal. And before we propose that, we consulted with stakeholders. But I want to tell you authoritatively now, NBS is not including prostitution and some any lawful activity into the output computation of Nigerian economy. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Aya Anthony. I know that Basil would probably love to respond to that, but then we are pressed for time. And this is one story that we are still going to look at, probably a B side of it, and have Dr. Aya Anthony and Basil Abia also join us to talk more about this. We need to have an understanding of this, and it would be nice to prod it further. Thank you so much, Dr. Aya Anthony, Head Price Statistics at NBS, and of course, Basil Abia, co-founder, Veriv Africa, for sharing your thoughts with us at this moment.